The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Boston Contemporary Art Gallery, casting warm shadows across the polished wooden floors. Dr. Sarah Bennett stood in the center of her newly opened gallery, her heart swelling with pride as she looked around at the artwork that surrounded her. At 35 years old, she had finally achieved her dream of opening her own gallery, making her one of the few black female gallery owners in the city. Sarah adjusted her navy blue blazer and walked slowly through the space, checking that every piece was perfectly positioned for the grand opening later that evening. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she moved from one installation to another. The walls were adorned with powerful paintings and photographs, each one carefully chosen to tell a story about social justice and equality. "Miss Bennett, the caterers are here," called out Mark, her young assistant, from the entrance. Sarah smiled at his formality, even though she had told him many times to call her Sarah. "Thank you, Mark. Please show them to the back area," she replied, watching as he hurried to guide the delivery team. Mark had been an incredible help over the past few months, working late nights and weekends to help get the gallery ready for opening day. Sarah walked over to her favorite piece in the exhibition, a large canvas painted with bold strokes of red, black, and gold, created by a rising star in the art world. The painting showed a group of people breaking free from chains, their faces filled with determination and hope. It was exactly the kind of meaningful art she had always dreamed of showcasing. As she stood there, memories of her journey flooded back. Growing up in a middle-class family in Chicago, Sarah had fallen in love with art during her first museum visit at age 10. Her parents, both schoolteachers, had encouraged her passion, even though they worried about the challenges she would face in such a competitive field. Those challenges had indeed been real. Throughout her years studying art history at Yale, she had often been the only black woman in her classes. People frequently assumed she was lost when she walked into high-end galleries or questioned her knowledge when she spoke about classical art. But Sarah had persevered, earning her doctorate and building a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable curators in the country. The sound of her phone ringing pulled her from her thoughts. It was her mother. "Hello, Mom," Sarah answered warmly. "Baby, are you nervous about tonight?" her mother asked, concern evident in her voice. "A little," Sarah admitted, "but mostly excited. I wish you and Dad could be here. Your father's knee surgery couldn't wait, sweetie. We'll be there in spirit, and we're so proud of you." After ending the call, Sarah checked her watch. It was already 2 p.m., and she had a meeting with potential donors at 3:30. These donors could be crucial for her plans to create art education programs for underprivileged children in the city. She walked to her office, a small but elegant room at the back of the gallery. The walls were covered with her degrees and awards, along with photos of her with various artists and museum directors from around the world. On her desk sat a small frame containing her father's favorite saying, "Excellence is the best response to prejudice." Mark appeared in the doorway again. "The flowers have arrived, and the lighting team is almost finished. Would you like to check their work?" "Yes, please," Sarah replied, gathering her tablet and phone. She needed to review the lighting, meet with her staff about tonight's event, and then head to the donor meeting. It was going to be a busy afternoon, but she was ready. As she walked through the gallery one more time, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This space represented not just her personal achievement, but a step forward for her community. She had created something special, a place where diverse voices could be heard through art, where new artists could find their platform, and where conversations about important social issues could begin. Little did Sarah know that her day would take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge her in ways she never imagined and lead to a confrontation that would change not only her life, but the lives of others in profound ways. Sarah glanced at her car's dashboard clock, 3:15 p.m. She had just 15 minutes to reach the downtown financial district for her meeting with the potential donors. After a quick check in her rearview mirror to ensure her appearance was perfect, she pulled out of the gallery's parking lot and onto the busy Boston streets. Traffic moved slowly through the city, making Sarah increasingly nervous about being late. She had worked too hard to risk making a bad impression on these donors. When she spotted a gap in traffic on a side street, she quickly turned right, hoping to find a faster route. The autumn weather had turned gloomy, with dark clouds threatening rain. Sarah kept one eye on the time as she navigated the unfamiliar streets. Her GPS indicated she was only 10 minutes away now, and she began to relax slightly. That's when she saw the flashing blue lights in her mirror. Not now, Sarah whispered to herself, carefully pulling over to the curb. She took a deep breath and reached for her purse to get her license and registration. Through her mirror, she watched a tall police officer approach her car. The officer, whose name tag read Officer Richards, tapped on her window. Sarah pressed the button to lower it, maintaining a calm and professional demeanor despite her racing heart. License and registration, Officer Richards demanded, not bothering with a greeting. His tone was harsh, making Sarah's stomach tighten. Of course, officer, Sarah replied politely, handing over the documents. May I ask why I'm being stopped? Officer Richards ignored her question, studying her license with unnecessary intensity. Where are you headed in such a hurry, Ms. Bennett? Dr. Bennett, she corrected gently. I have an important business meeting downtown. I'm running a bit late, but I wasn't speeding. The officer's expression hardened at her correction. You ran a stop sign back there, and you made an illegal right turn. Step out of the vehicle. Sarah's heart dropped. She was certain she hadn't run any stop signs, and there had been no signs prohibiting right turns. Still, she knew better than to argue. Slowly and carefully, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of her car. Stand by the trunk, Officer Richards commanded, his hand resting on his belt. Sarah complied, very aware of how exposed she felt on the busy street. Several passers-by slowed down to watch, some taking out their phones. Officer, I respect your work, but I honestly don't believe I committed any violations, Sarah said calmly. I'm happy to discuss this, but I have an extremely important meeting. Ma'am, are you trying to tell me how to do my job? Officer Richards cut her off. He began writing on his ticket pad with sharp, angry movements. Your attitude isn't helping your situation. Sarah fell silent, remembering all the conversations she'd had with her parents about handling situations like this. Stay calm, they'd always said. Live to fight another day. Rain started to fall as Officer Richards wrote not one but 3 tickets. Sarah stood there getting wet, her carefully styled hair beginning to lose its shape, her expensive suit dampening in the drizzle. She thought about her donors waiting at the office, about her gallery opening that evening, about all the hard work that had led to this day. Here are your citations, Officer Richards said, thrusting the papers toward her. 3 violations: running a stop sign, illegal turn, and failure to signal. Total fine comes to $850. You can either pay or contest these in traffic court next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Sarah accepted the tickets with trembling hands, not from fear but from suppressed anger. She knew arguing would only make things worse, so she simply said, "Thank you, officer. Have a good day." Back in her car, Sarah looked at the time, 3:45 p.m. She was now officially late for her meeting. With shaking fingers, she called her assistant. "Mark, I need you to contact the donors. Tell them I've been delayed due to an urgent situation. Ask if we can reschedule for tomorrow morning." As she drove away, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't just pay these unfair tickets. She would contest them in court. She had dealt with prejudice in subtle forms throughout her career, but this was different. This time, she would stand up for herself. What Sarah didn't know was that her decision to fight these tickets would lead to an encounter that would challenge not only her patience but also expose deep-rooted prejudices in the justice system itself. The courthouse stood tall and imposing against the morning sky as Sarah walked up the stone steps the following Tuesday. She had chosen to wear a simple but elegant black pantsuit, her gallery ID badge still pinned to her lapel from her morning meetings. Despite her professional appearance, she couldn't shake the nervous feeling in her stomach. Inside, the traffic court was already crowded. Sarah found a seat in the middle row, watching as other people went before Judge Michael Crawford. She noticed quickly that the judge seemed irritated, handling each case with brief, sharp comments. "He's always like that," whispered an older woman sitting next to Sarah. "Been here 3 times myself. Judge Crawford doesn't like excuses." Sarah nodded politely but said nothing. She had spent the past week preparing her defense, gathering photos of the intersection where she was stopped, and even finding a witness who had recorded part of her interaction with Officer Richards on their phone. "Case number 247, Sarah Bennett," called out the court clerk. Sarah stood, straightened her jacket, and walked confidently to the podium. Judge Crawford barely looked up from his papers as she approached. Miss Bennett, you're charged with running a stop sign, making an illegal turn, and failure to signal. How do you plead? Judge Crawford's voice was flat and uninterested. Not guilty, Your Honor, Sarah replied clearly. And it's Dr. Bennett. Judge Crawford finally looked up, his gray eyebrows furrowing. Doctor? Of what exactly? I hold a doctorate in art history from Yale University, Your Honor. I'm the curator and owner of the Boston Contemporary Art Gallery. Sarah maintained eye contact, keeping her voice steady. This is traffic court, Ms. Bennett. Judge Crawford emphasized the Ms. deliberately. Your education has no bearing on whether you followed traffic laws. Sarah took a deep breath. I understand, Your Honor. I have evidence to show that I did not commit these violations. First, there is no stop sign at the intersection where Officer Richards. Judge Crawford interrupted, looking toward the back of the courtroom where the officer stood. Did you clearly observe Ms. Bennett running a stop sign? Yes, Your Honor. Officer Richards replied promptly. The defendant was driving recklessly and showed a poor attitude when stopped. Sarah felt her face grow warm. Your Honor, I have photographs showing there is no stop sign at that intersection. I also have video evidence of my interaction with Officer Richards. Ms. Bennett. Judge Crawford cut her off again, his voice sharp. Are you suggesting that a decorated officer would lie about a simple traffic violation? The courtroom had grown quiet. Sarah could feel everyone watching her. No, Your Honor. I'm simply presenting evidence to support my case. As a citizen, I have the right. Let me stop you right there. Judge Crawford leaned forward in his chair. Your attitude in this courtroom is concerning. First, you insist on flaunting your credentials, and now you're questioning the integrity of an officer of the law. Sarah's heart pounded, but she kept her composure. Your Honor, I'm not questioning anyone's integrity. I'm exercising my right to present evidence in my defense. Judge Crawford's face reddened slightly. Ms. Bennett, your continuous interruptions and argumentative tone are not helping your case. Given your lack of respect for this court and Officer Richards' testimony, I'm doubling the original fine. You will pay $1,700, and I suggest you think about your attitude. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the unfairness of it all. The older woman who had spoken to her earlier shook her head sympathetically. Do you have anything else to say, Ms. Bennett? Judge Crawford asked, already looking down at the next case file. Sarah straightened her shoulders. Only that I will be filing an appeal, Your Honor. That's your right, Judge Crawford replied dismissively. Next case. As Sarah walked out of the courtroom, her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. This wasn't just about traffic tickets anymore. This was about dignity, respect, and justice. What Judge Crawford didn't know was that their paths would cross again very soon, in a very different setting. Outside the courthouse, Sarah checked her phone. She had 3 missed calls from her assistant, Mark. The gallery was hosting a special preview event that evening for the museum board of directors. Little did she know that this event would bring an unexpected twist to her story with Judge Crawford. That evening, the Museum of Fine Arts buzzed with excitement. The annual fundraising gala was one of Boston's most prestigious social events, bringing together the city's elite art patrons and cultural leaders. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as wealthy donors in expensive evening wear mingled throughout the grand hall. Judge Michael Crawford adjusted his bow tie uncomfortably as he and his wife, Eleanor, entered the museum. He didn't particularly enjoy these social events, but as a prominent figure in the city's legal community, his presence was expected. Michael, please try to smile, Eleanor whispered, squeezing his arm. The museum board was kind enough to invite us. Besides, you might actually enjoy the art for once. Judge Crawford nodded absently, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The day's cases still weighed on his mind, particularly the confrontation with that difficult woman in traffic court. He couldn't understand why some people couldn't simply accept the consequences of their actions. Oh, look! Eleanor's voice brightened. They're about to introduce the keynote speaker. I hear she's done amazing things for the art community. The museum director stepped up to the microphone, tapping it gently to get everyone's attention. Distinguished guests, thank you all for coming tonight. We are honored to have with us someone who has revolutionized the way we think about modern art in Boston. Please welcome Dr. Sarah Bennett, curator of the Boston Contemporary Art Gallery and our newest museum board member. Judge Crawford nearly choked on his champagne. He watched in disbelief as the same woman he had found that morning walked confidently to the podium. Gone was the simple black pantsuit, replaced by an elegant evening gown. Her presence commanded the room's attention immediately. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Sarah began, her voice warm and assured. "Art has the power to challenge our perspectives, to make us question our assumptions, and to bridge the gaps that often divide our society." As she spoke passionately about making art accessible to underserved communities and her plans for educational programs, Judge Crawford felt increasingly uncomfortable. He listened as she described her journey from a childhood in Chicago to earning her doctorate at Yale, her work in prestigious galleries across Europe, and her vision for transforming Boston's art scene. "The woman's brilliant," he'd heard someone nearby whisper. "Did you know she turned down a curator position at the Louvre to open her gallery here?" Eleanor turned to her husband, eyes wide. "Michael, isn't she the same person you were telling me about from Traffic Court? The one you said was being difficult?" Judge Crawford couldn't respond. He watched as after her speech, Sarah moved effortlessly through the crowd, greeting museum trustees and wealthy donors by name. Everyone seemed to know her, respect her, admire her. "Dr. Bennett," called out the mayor's wife, hurrying over to embrace Sarah. "That new exhibition at your gallery is extraordinary. The pieces you chose about justice and equality, so powerful." Judge Crawford observed as Sarah discussed complex artistic concepts with authority, charmed potential donors with her knowledge, and handled difficult questions with grace. This was clearly not the argumentative, disrespectful person he had imagined her to be that morning. "I need some air," he muttered to Eleanor, making his way to a quiet corner of the museum. Through a large window, you can see the courthouse where, just hours ago, he had treated this accomplished woman with such dismissive contempt. A waiter passed by with a tray of programs for the evening. Judge Crawford picked one up, reading Sarah's biography. Dr. Sarah Bennett, Ph.D., Yale University. Former curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Recipient of the National Arts Leadership Award. Named one of Time magazine's 40 Under 40 for her work in making fine art accessible to underserved communities. The weight of his earlier prejudgment began to crush him. He had never asked to see her evidence. He had dismissed her credentials as irrelevant showing off. He had doubled her fine simply because her insistence on being addressed correctly had irritated him. As the evening continued around him, Judge Crawford stood alone with his thoughts, realizing that tomorrow's court cases would feel very different. What he didn't know was that this evening would mark the beginning of a profound change in his approach to justice. Later that night, Judge Crawford sat in his home office, surrounded by case files from the past year. Sleep had eluded him since returning from the museum gala, his mind troubled by the evening's revelations. The desk lamp cast a soft glow as he pulled out file after file, reviewing his past decisions with new eyes. Eleanor brought him a cup of tea, setting it gently beside him. "You've been unusually quiet since we got home, Michael. What's bothering you?" He looked up at his wife of 30 years, seeing the concern in her eyes. "I made a mistake today, Eleanor. Not just a small one, the kind that makes you question everything." "Because of Dr. Bennett?" she asked softly, taking a seat across from him. Judge Crawford nodded, picking up the morning's court records. "I didn't even look at her evidence. Didn't give her a chance to present her case. I saw a black woman questioning authority, and his voice trailed off. And you reacted based on assumptions." Eleanor finished for him. She had always been direct, one of the qualities he loved about her. He spread out several case files on his desk. "I've been reviewing my past rulings, looking for patterns. It's not comfortable, what I'm finding." The files told a disturbing story. Cases involving minorities consistently showed harsher penalties. Their evidence was more likely to be dismissed, their testimonies given less weight. The data was right there in black and white, impossible to ignore. "Remember what you told me when you first became a judge?" Eleanor asked. "You said you wanted to be fair and just, make a difference in people's lives." Judge Crawford remembered that younger version of himself, full of ideals about justice and equality. Somewhere along the way, he had let biases cloud his judgment, had stopped seeing the individuals before him. He picked up his phone and Googled Dr. Sarah Bennett. Articles about her gallery openings appeared, along with interviews about her work in making art accessible to inner-city children. There was a video of her giving a TED talk about breaking barriers in the art world. In every picture, she radiated the same dignity and intelligence he had witnessed at the gala. I doubled her fine because she asked to be addressed as Doctor, he admitted to Eleanor, shame evident in his voice. I saw it as attitude, but she had earned that title, worked hard for it, just like I worked hard to be called Judge. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. So what are you going to do about it? The question hung in the air. Judge Crawford turned to his computer and began typing. First, he drafted a formal order to vacate Dr. Bennett's fines. Then he started a longer document, a proposal for mandatory bias training for all courthouse staff, including himself. As the night grew later, he continued working. He pulled statistics on sentencing disparities, drafted guidelines for more equitable hearing procedures, and wrote a personal letter to Dr. Bennett. It's not enough to just recognize our mistakes, he said finally, rubbing his tired eyes. We have to actively work to correct them. Eleanor smiled softly. That sounds more like the man I married. Judge Crawford looked at the clock. 3 a.m. In 6 hours, he would be back in his courtroom. But this time would be different. He thought about all the people who would stand before him, each with their own story, their own achievements, their own dignity. I need to find out where her gallery is, he said, making another note. I owe her more than just a written apology. One step at a time, Eleanor advised, gathering up his empty teacup. Change doesn't happen overnight, but at least you're moving in the right direction. As his wife left the room, Judge Crawford sat back in his chair, thinking about the day ahead. He knew that truly changing ingrained behaviors would take more than one night of revelation, but for the first time in years, he felt awake, truly awake, to his own prejudices and the power he had to either perpetuate or fight against systemic bias. What he didn't know was that his upcoming conversation with Dr. Bennett would challenge and change him even more profoundly than this night of self-reflection. The Boston Contemporary Art Gallery was quiet when Judge Crawford arrived the next afternoon. He had taken the rest of the day off after his morning court session, something he rarely did. Through the large glass windows, you could see modern artwork displayed on pristine white walls. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. A young man at the front desk looked up from his computer. Welcome to Boston Contemporary. I'm Mark. How can I help you today? I'd like to speak with Dr. Bennett, if possible, Judge Crawford said, his voice less commanding than it usually was in court. My name is Michael Crawford. Mark's friendly expression changed slightly at the name. One moment, please. He picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it. While waiting, Judge Crawford walked slowly through the gallery. He stopped in front of a large painting showing hands of different colors reaching toward each other. The title card read, Bridge the Gap, a study in human connection. Judge Crawford, a familiar voice called from behind him. He turned to see Sarah Bennett standing there, her expression professional but guarded. What brings you to my gallery? Dr. Bennett, he began, noticing how different it felt to say her title with respect rather than sarcasm. I came to apologize, and to listen, if you're willing to talk. Sarah studied him for a moment, then gestured toward her office. Please, come with me. Her office was bright and welcoming, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Awards and degrees hung on one wall, while the opposite wall displayed children's artwork. Judge Crawford noticed a thank you card that read, To Dr. B. Thanks for teaching us about art. Love, Wilson Elementary 3rd grade. Please, sit, Sarah said, taking her place behind the desk. The power dynamic was different here. This was her territory, not his courtroom. First, Judge Crawford began, pulling out an official envelope. This is a court order vacating all your fines from yesterday, but that's not why I'm here. Sarah accepted the envelope but didn't open it. Why are you here, Judge Crawford? He looked directly at her. Because I was wrong. Not just about the traffic tickets, but about how I treated you. I let my biases affect my judgment, and that's unacceptable for anyone, especially a judge. Do you know how many times I've been dismissed or underestimated because of how I look? Sarah asked quietly. How many times I've had to prove myself worthy of basic respect? No, I don't, Judge Crawford admitted. And that's part of the problem. Until last night, I never really thought about it, but seeing you at the museum, learning about your work, it made me examine my own behavior. I spent all night reviewing my past cases, and I didn't like what I found. Sarah leaned forward slightly. And what do you plan to do about that? I'm implementing mandatory bias training for all courthouse staff, including myself, he replied. I'm reviewing my past rulings for patterns of discrimination, but I know that's just a start. It is just a start, Sarah agreed. She stood and walked to the wall of children's artwork. Every week, I teach art to kids from low-income neighborhoods. Many of them have already had negative experiences with the justice system, either directly or through their families. They're learning to expect unfairness. Judge Crawford felt the weight of her words. How can I help change that? You're asking the right question, Sarah said, turning back to face him. But the answer isn't simple. It requires ongoing commitment, not just a one-time apology. I'm willing to do the work, he said firmly. And I would value your guidance in understanding perspectives I've been blind to. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering his words. What she said next would set in motion a series of events that would impact not just their lives, but the entire Boston legal community. 3 months after their meeting in the gallery, Sarah sat in the back of Judge Crawford's courtroom, observing the changes that had taken place. The atmosphere was noticeably different from the day of her traffic hearing. The judge now listened patiently to each person who came before him, giving them proper time to present their cases. Today was special. It was the first session of the new youth court program they had created together. The program allowed teenagers from local high schools to serve as jury members for minor juvenile cases under the guidance of Judge Crawford and other legal professionals. Sarah watched as a nervous 15-year-old boy stood before the court, charged with spray painting graffiti on a local building. Instead of immediately punishing him, Judge Crawford asked, "Young man, I see you're interested in art. Could you tell us about what you were trying to express?" The boy looked surprised at the question. I just wanted people to notice. To see that kids like me exist too." Judge Crawford nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. Bennett, would you please join us?" Sarah walked to the front of the courtroom. Over the past months, she had become a regular presence here, helping to bridge the gap between the justice system and the community. The teenage jury members sat up straighter, recognizing her from their art education programs. "Your Honor," Sarah addressed the judge, then turned to the young defendant. "We have a community art program at the gallery. Instead of a fine or punishment, perhaps we could channel your creativity into legal art projects." The boy's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd let me do that?" Judge Crawford looked at the teenage jury. "What do you think would be a fair resolution?" The young jurors discussed among themselves before their forewoman stood. "We think he should do community service at Dr. Bennett's gallery, learn proper art techniques, and help create a mural for the community center." "An excellent suggestion," Judge Crawford agreed. "But there must also be consequences for the property damage. I propose you work part-time to pay for cleaning the building, while spending your weekends learning at the gallery. Do you accept this arrangement?" The boy nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir, thank you." After court adjourned, Sarah and Judge Crawford met in his chambers. The walls, once bare except for law degrees, now displayed artwork from community programs alongside legal documents. "That went well," Sarah said, sitting down. "The teenage jury program is making a real difference." Judge Crawford smiled. "It's changing how these young people view the justice system, and how I view them." He picked up a thick folder from his desk. "Look at these statistics from the past 3 months." The numbers showed significant changes. Decreased repeat offenses, more community service sentences instead of fines, and positive feedback from court participants. Most importantly, the racial disparities in sentencing had begun to decrease. "We're making progress," Sarah acknowledged, "but there's still work to do." "Indeed," Judge Crawford agreed. "The other judges are starting to notice. 3 more have asked to implement similar programs in their courtrooms." Sarah pulled out her tablet, showing him designs for a new project. "The gallery is planning an exhibition called Justice Through Different Eyes. It will feature artwork from our youth programs, including pieces by that young graffiti artist from his first month with us." Speaking of the gallery, Judge Crawford said, "Eleanor and I attended your latest exhibition, the piece about breaking down barriers. It was powerful." Sarah smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that tense day in traffic court. Sometimes the strongest messages come from unexpected moments. As they continued planning future initiatives, both reflected on how their confrontation had transformed into collaboration. What had started as a simple traffic stop had sparked changes throughout the Boston legal system. Next week, Sarah mentioned, we're starting art therapy sessions for juvenile offenders. Would you be interested in speaking to them about your own journey of learning and change? Judge Crawford's answer would lead to yet another breakthrough in their ongoing mission to reform the system from within. 1 year after the traffic court incident, the Boston Contemporary Art Gallery was packed with an unusual mix of people. Art lovers stood alongside judges, teenage artists chatted with police officers, and community activists mingled with city officials. They had all gathered for the opening of a special exhibition titled Justice Reimagined. Sarah stood at the center of the main hall, surrounded by artwork that told stories of transformation. The gallery walls displayed paintings, photographs, and sculptures created by participants from their various programs. Young offenders who had found their voice through art, police officers who had taken art therapy classes, and community members sharing their experiences with the justice system. Judge Crawford arrived with Eleanor, both stopping to admire a large mural near the entrance. The painting had been created by that same young graffiti artist from their first youth court session, now a regular student at the gallery's art programs. The mural showed a courtroom transforming into a garden, with flowers breaking through the floorboards and butterflies emerging from law books. Dr. Bennett, Judge Crawford called out warmly, "This exhibition is remarkable." Sarah smiled, remembering how different their first encounter had been. "Thank you, Michael. I'm especially proud of the community participation section." They walked together through the gallery, stopping at various pieces. There was a wall of photographs showing the youth court in action, artwork created by former offenders, and a special installation about breaking down prejudices. In one corner, a video played showing interviews with people whose lives had been changed by the new programs. "Look at these numbers," Sarah said, pointing to an infographic display. Over the past year, their initiatives had led to a 60% decrease in repeat offenses among youth participants. Community satisfaction with the court system had improved significantly, and other cities were beginning to study their program as a model for reform. Mayor Thompson approached them, shaking both their hands. "Congratulations on the exhibition. The Justice Department representatives were very impressed with your programs. They're considering implementing similar initiatives nationwide." As they thanked the mayor, a group of teenage art students rushed up to Sarah. "Dr. B, can we show Judge Crawford our new project?" Sarah nodded encouragingly, and the teenagers led them to a collective artwork they had created. It showed a series of doors opening, each one revealing a different perspective on justice and understanding. "We wanted to show how one moment can open many doors," explained one of the students. "Like how your traffic court story led to all of this." Judge Crawford looked thoughtful. That day changed more than just our lives. It changed an entire system. Later in the evening, Sarah and Judge Crawford found themselves back in her office, now decorated with thank you letters from program participants and photos of successful exhibitions. "Did you ever imagine this would grow so big?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the busy gallery below. "Never," Judge Crawford admitted. "But it proves that real change is possible when we're willing to confront our biases and work together." Sarah picked up a newspaper article about their programs. "The best part is watching the ripple effects. Other courts are adopting our methods. Police departments are implementing similar training programs, and communities are starting to trust the system more. And it all started because you refused to accept an unfair fine," Judge Crawford said with a small smile. "No," Sarah corrected him. "It started because you were willing to acknowledge your mistake and work to fix it. That's what made all this possible." They looked out the window at the city lights. In courtrooms across Boston, judges were now required to undergo regular bias training. The police department had established new community engagement programs. And most importantly, people who might have been dismissed or unfairly treated were now being heard. "We're not finished yet," Sarah said, showing him plans for expanding their programs to other cities. Judge Crawford nodded. "No, we're not. But we've proven that justice can be both firm and compassionate, that authority can coexist with understanding, and that change begins with being willing to see people for who they truly are." As they watched the diverse crowd below enjoying the exhibition, Both Sarah and Judge Crawford knew that their story would continue to inspire others to challenge their assumptions and work toward a more equitable justice system.